Story number 1. The Death Tunnel Memories from Waverly Hills Sanatorium. I never believed in ghosts. As a rational person with a background in medical history, I always sought logical explanations for the unexplained. But Waverly Hills Sanatorium, with its grim history and eerie reputation, was about to challenge everything I thought I knew about the world. It was late October 2023 when I decided to visit Waverly Hills, Kentucky, to research my next book on historic medical facilities. The sanatorium, once a beacon of hope during the early 20th century battle against tuberculosis, had long since been abandoned and left to decay. Stories of hauntings and the infamous death tunnel had turned it into a hotspot for ghost hunters and thrill-seekers alike, intrigued by both its history and its legends. I knew this was the perfect setting for my exploration. The sun was setting as I approached the imposing Gothic structure, its high windows and dark stone walls casting long, menacing shadows. The air was thick with anticipation and the scent of autumn leaves. Armed with my camera, notebook, and a flashlight, I met up with our local guide, Michael Thompson, a middle-aged man with a deep knowledge of Waverly Hills' past and its supernatural tales. "Ready for a walk down memory lane?" Michael asked with a hint of a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Absolutely," I replied, trying to mask my nervousness. "Let's uncover some history." We entered the main entrance, the heavy doors creaking ominously as we stepped inside. The interior was a stark contrast to the well-maintained exterior of modern hospitals. Dust-covered beds, decaying furniture, and remnants of long-forgotten medical equipment greeted us. The silence was palpable, broken only by the occasional drip of water echoing through the halls. "As you can see," Michael began, "Waverly Hills was one of the largest tuberculosis treatment centers in the world. Over 15,000 patients passed through these walls, and tragically, over 6,000 lost their lives here." I jotted down notes, absorbing every detail, but it was when Michael mentioned the death tunnel that my curiosity truly piqued. "Most people are here for the history," he continued, "but those who stay after dark come seeking something else. The death tunnel is a place shrouded in mystery and fear. It's said that the spirits of those who perished here still roam its corridors, unable to find peace." My skepticism warred with intrigue. "Have you ever experienced anything unusual?" Michael's expression darkened. "Many have. Some never make it out. The tunnel isn't just a physical place. It's said to hold the anguish and despair of countless souls." Ignoring the unease creeping up my spine, I insisted, "I'd like to see the death tunnel. For research purposes, of course." He hesitated for a moment before nodding. "All right, but we proceed with caution. The tunnel can be unpredictable." We made our way through the winding halls until we reached a heavy iron door labeled Death Tunnel. Michael paused, taking a deep breath before pushing it open. The air grew colder as we stepped inside, the temperature dropping noticeably. My flashlight flickered, casting long, wavering shadows on the damp walls. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side. The walls were lined with old wooden beams, and the floor was uneven, littered with debris from years of neglect. As we ventured deeper, an oppressive silence enveloped us, broken only by the distant sound of dripping water. "Stay close," Michael whispered, his voice barely audible. "And keep your light steady." I nodded, heart pounding in my chest. The further we went, the more claustrophobic the tunnel became. My flashlight illuminated faded murals and cryptic symbols etched into the stone, remnants of a bygone era. Suddenly, a low, mournful moan echoed through the tunnel, sending a chill down my spine. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Michael glanced around, eyes narrowed. "Probably just the building settling. Don't let it get to you." But deep down, I knew there was something more. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow and unrest, as if the very walls were imbued with the pain of the past. As we continued, the moaning grew louder, transforming into indistinct whispers that seemed to surround us. "Why are you here?" a voice suddenly demanded, its tone both accusatory and desperate. I froze, searching for the source, but saw nothing. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer. Silence followed, oppressive and heavy. Michael tightened his grip on my shoulder. "Let's keep moving." We pressed on, the tunnel stretching endlessly before us. The air grew heavier, making each breath a struggle. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the wall. Heart racing, I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a stray animal or a trick of the light. But then, the whispers returned, clearer this time. "Leave now," they pleaded. "This place is not for the living." Panic surged through me. "Maybe we should turn back," I suggested, my voice barely a whisper. Michael shook his head. "No, we're here to uncover the truth. Besides, we haven't even reached the end yet." As if on cue, the tunnel seemed to twist and distort, the path ahead elongating unnaturally. The air grew thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. Pressing in from all sides, my flashlight illuminated figures emerging from the shadows, pale, translucent forms of people in old-fashioned hospital gowns, their eyes hollow and eyes fixed on us. One of them stepped forward, a woman with tear-streaked cheeks. "Why do you disturb our rest?" she asked, her voice echoing with sorrow. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "We mean no harm. We're here to understand your story." Another figure, a man with a stern expression, added, "Understand? We lived and died here. Our stories were lost to time." Michael stepped forward cautiously. "We're here to remember you, to ensure your experiences are not forgotten." The spirits seemed to waver, their forms flickering like dying flames. The woman reached out a ghostly hand. "Then listen. Remember our pain, our suffering. Let our voices be heard." A sudden gust of wind swept through the tunnel, extinguishing my flashlight. Total darkness enveloped us, and the whispers intensified into a cacophony of voices, each telling their own tale of loss and despair. I fumbled to turn my flashlight back on, desperate to regain some sense of reality. When the light finally returned, the tunnel had transformed. The walls were no longer just stone and wood but seemed alive with the echoes of the past, ghostly apparitions reenacting their final moments. I saw patients being moved, doctors hurriedly working, and families saying tearful goodbyes. Overwhelmed, I sank to my knees, tears streaming down my face. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't mean to intrude." Michael placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. They're just sharing their memories." Slowly, the apparitions began to fade, their sorrowful expressions softening. The oppressive atmosphere lifted slightly, replaced by a sense of calm. The tunnel no longer felt like a place of fear, but a repository of lost stories yearning to be remembered. As we made our way back to the entrance, the weight of what we had experienced settled over me. Waverly Hills wasn't just a building of bricks and mortar. It was a living testament to the lives lost and the stories untold. The death tunnel, once a place of darkness and despair, had revealed its true nature, a bridge between the past and the present, urging us to remember and honor those who could no longer speak for themselves. Outside, the night had fully settled, the stars obscured by a thick blanket of clouds. Michael looked at me, his expression serious yet compassionate. "Not everyone is ready to hear their stories," he said softly. "But you listened." I nodded, understanding the profound responsibility that now rested on my shoulders. As I left Waverly Hills that night, the memories of the death tunnel lingered, a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the enduring power of memory. The experience had changed me, deepening my appreciation for the stories that shape our understanding of history and the unseen threads that connect us all. Back in my study, as I began to write, the whispers of Waverly Hills echoed in my mind, guiding my pen to capture the essence of those restless souls. Their stories were no longer confined to the shadows of the past, but had found a voice through my words, ensuring that the legacy of Waverly Hills Sanatorium would live on, not just in history books, but in the hearts and minds of those who dared to listen. Story number 2. Shadows of Belitz, Echoes from the Forgotten Hospital. I've always been fascinated by places where history and mystery intertwine, where the echoes of the past seem to linger just beneath the surface. So when I heard about Belitz Heilstätten in Germany, a sprawling abandoned military hospital with a dark history, I knew I had to visit. Little did I realize that this journey would plunge me into a nightmare that would forever change my perception of reality. It was a crisp autumn morning when I arrived in Belitz, the air tinged with the scent of fallen leaves and impending rain. The hospital complex stood ominously against the gray sky, its once grand facades now crumbling and overgrown with ivy. Built in the early 20th century, Belitz Heilstätten served as a military hospital for the German army, witnessing the horrors of both world wars and the tumultuous era of East Germany. The stories whispered among locals spoke of haunted surgical rooms and apparitions of patients who never left. Determined to uncover the truth behind these tales, I teamed up with Eric Muller, a local historian with a deep understanding of the hospital's history. Together, we navigated the labyrinthine corridors of Belitz Heilstätten, our flashlights casting long shadows on the decaying walls. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant drip of water and the creaking of old floorboards under our feet. Legend has it that Hitler was treated here after being wounded, Eric explained, his voice echoing softly in the vast, empty hallway. And during World War II, countless soldiers were brought here, many of whom never returned. Even after the war, the hospital remained a place of sorrow and secrets. As we ventured deeper into the complex, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. We reached what was once the main surgical wing, its doors hanging off their hinges, revealing rooms frozen in time. Stainless steel tables were scarred with rust, and faded medical charts littered the floors. I've heard that some explorers have seen ghostly figures wandering these halls, I said, trying to mask the unease creeping up my spine. People in old-fashioned patient gowns, roaming the abandoned surgical rooms. Eric nodded thoughtfully. There are also reports of unexplained moans and the feeling of being watched. It's as if the spirits of those who suffered here can't find peace. We set up our equipment, cameras, audio recorders, and motion sensors, hoping to capture evidence of the supernatural. As dusk began to settle, the temperature inside the hospital seemed to drop, and a thick fog began to seep through the broken windows, enveloping us in its cold embrace. "Let's split up," Eric suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. "I want to cover more ground. Meet back here in 2 hours." I hesitated but agreed, knowing that the only way to uncover the truth was to explore every corner of this haunted place. With a final glance at Eric, I turned and made my way down a narrow corridor towards the old surgical ward. The further I walked, the more the building seemed to come alive with its own memories. Faded murals depicting scenes of healing and hope were now marred by cracks and graffiti. I could almost hear the distant sounds of hurried footsteps and muffled cries, remnants of a time long past. As I entered one of the surgical rooms, the air grew colder, and my breath became visible in the dim light. The room was eerily silent, the only sound my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I set up my camera on a tripod, aiming it towards the center of the room where a large surgical table stood. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I turned slowly, and there, at the far end of the room, stood a figure in an old-fashioned patient gown. Its face was obscured by shadows, but its presence was unmistakable. I froze, unable to move as the figure began to drift towards me, each step deliberate and haunting. "Hello," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure stopped, and I could feel its gaze piercing through me. For a moment, time seemed to stand still, the weight of countless untold stories pressing down on me. Without warning, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence once more. My heart raced as I reviewed the footage, hoping to see something I hadn't witnessed firsthand. To my horror, the video showed nothing unusual, no apparitions, no movements. It was as if the figure had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Shaken, I decided it was time to regroup with Eric. As I made my way back through the winding corridors, the feeling of being watched intensified. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified. The temperature continued to drop, and I could see my breath misting in the air around me. When I finally reached the main meeting point, Eric was already there, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "We need to leave," he said urgently. "Something's not right here." Before I could respond, the ground beneath us seemed to tremble, and a low, mournful moan echoed through the halls. The walls vibrated with the sounds of past suffering, cries of pain, whispers of despair. The fog thickened, swirling around us in a ghostly dance, and the temperature plummeted further. "We have to go now," Eric insisted, grabbing my arm. "This place isn't safe after dark." As we hurried towards the exit, the corridors seemed to stretch endlessly, the layout shifting in impossible ways. Doors that were once open were now locked, and windows that provided glimpses of the outside world were obscured by the fog. Panic set in as we realized we were lost within the very walls of Bielitz-Heilstätten. A shadowy figure appeared at the end of the hallway, his presence unmistakable. "Why are you here?" it demanded, its voice echoing with 1,000 voices. Eric and I exchanged terrified glances, our resolve wavering. "We mean no harm," I stammered. "We're just trying to understand." The figure advanced, and the air grew thick with sorrow and rage. Suddenly, the walls began to close in, the ceiling lowering as if the building itself was trying to suffocate us. Desperate, we ran, our footsteps echoing loudly in the confined space. Just as hope seemed lost, a blinding light flooded the corridor, and we found ourselves outside, gasping for breath. The hospital loomed behind us, its windows dark and uninviting. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our car, hearts pounding and minds reeling from the experience. As we drove away, the fog lifted, and the first light of dawn broke through the clouds. We glanced back once more, but Bielitz-Heilstätten stood silent, its secrets hidden once again behind its decaying walls. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the images of that haunted surgical room and the sorrowful spirits that lingered within. The experience at Bielitz-Heilstätten had left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the stories that refuse to fade into history. If you ever find yourself wandering the abandoned halls of Bielitz-Heilstätten, remember that some places hold onto their past with a grip that won't let go. The shadows here are not just remnants of a bygone era. They are echoes of lives lost, yearning to be heard, and a testament to the darkness that can dwell within the walls of even the most hallowed institutions. So next time you pass by Bielitz-Heilstätten, take a moment to reflect on the stories that lie hidden within, and tread carefully, for you never know what shadows might watch you from the darkness. Story number 3. Echoes of Ganjiam, a haunting at the abandoned psychiatric hospital. I've always been drawn to places steeped in mystery, where history and the supernatural intertwine. So when I heard about Ganjiam Psychiatric Hospital in South Korea, a sprawling, abandoned mental institution that shut its doors abruptly in the 1990s without any clear reason, I couldn't resist the urge to explore it. Little did I know that this decision would lead me into a nightmare far beyond my darkest imaginings. It was a chilly October morning when I arrived in Seoul, the bustling city unaware of the horrors that lay just a few hours away. My friend Jiho had heard the stories and insisted we investigate the hospital together. As a freelance writer specializing in paranormal phenomena, I saw this as the perfect opportunity for my next article. The legends surrounding Ganjiam were both chilling and tantalizing. Whispers of patients who died mysteriously during brutal experiments conducted by the hospital's doctors. and countless accounts of strange occurrences experienced by those who dared to enter its decaying halls. Our journey began with a rented van, the cityscape giving way to winding country roads flanked by dense forests. By late afternoon, the imposing structure of Ganjiam Psychiatric Hospital emerged through the trees, its once grand facade now marred by graffiti and nature's relentless encroachment. The main entrance loomed before us, the heavy doors hanging precariously on their hinges. Inviting yet foreboding, Jiho and I stepped out, the gravel crunching under our boots. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Armed with flashlights, cameras, and a portable recorder, we approached the entrance. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant calls of birds and the rustling of leaves. As we pushed open the doors, a cold draft greeted us, carrying with it an unsettling sense of abandonment. "Are you sure we want to do this?" Jiho asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, trying to mask my own apprehension. "We need to document everything. If these stories are true, people deserve to know." Inside, the hospital was a labyrinth of long, narrow corridors illuminated by the weak beam of our flashlights. The walls, once pristine white, were now stained and peeling, revealing the scars of time and neglect. Broken furniture, scattered papers, and remnants of old medical equipment lay in disarray, painting a vivid picture of the chaos that must have ensued during the hospital's final days. "We should start with the main ward," Jiho suggested, leading the way. "That's where most of the activity is supposed to have happened." As we entered the large, open space of the main ward, the atmosphere grew heavier. The ceiling, once high and grand, was now crumbling, allowing shards of light to pierce through the darkness. We set up our equipment, the recorder capturing every sound, no matter how faint. "Let's see if we can pick up anything," I said, activating the recorder. The silence that followed was almost deafening, but after a few moments, faint sounds began to emerge, distant, muffled whispers that seemed to come from all directions. "Did you hear that?" Jiho asked, his eyes scanning the room nervously. I nodded, heart pounding. "It's coming from over there." I pointed towards a shadowy corner where an old gurney lay abandoned. We approached cautiously, the air growing colder with each step. Suddenly, the doors to the ward slammed shut with a force that made both of us jump. I rushed to the door, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic began to set in as the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. "Jiho, stay calm," I tried to reassure him, though my own voice betrayed my fear. "We need to find another way out." As we turned to leave, a sound like children's laughter echoed through the ward, bouncing off the walls and filling the space with an eerie resonance. Shadows danced at the edges of our vision, and I felt an inexplicable presence watching us, closing in. "We need to document this," I whispered, fumbling with my camera to capture the fleeting shadows. The screen showed blurry figures moving just out of focus, their forms indistinct but undeniably human. Jiho suggested we split up to cover more ground, but instinctively, I knew better. "No, we stick together. It's safer." Reluctantly, he agreed, and we continued our exploration, the oppressive atmosphere pressing in on us from all sides. Every room we entered seemed to tell a story of pain and suffering. Beds overturned, personal belongings scattered, and the lingering sense of anguish that hung in the air. In what appeared to be the old therapy room, we found remnants of past treatments, rusty restraints, broken chairs, and faded medical charts detailing experiments that made my skin crawl. As I reviewed the charts, the gravity of what happened here began to sink in. These weren't just ordinary patients. They were subjects of horrific experiments, their lives cut short by the very hands meant to heal them. A sudden noise made us both spin around. The sound of footsteps echoed down the corridor. Even though no one else was supposed to be here, we froze, listening as the footsteps grew louder, then abruptly stopped. The laughter returned, louder and more insistent this time, filling the room with a maddening cacophony. Maybe we should leave, Jiho suggested, his voice trembling. Before I could respond, the door to the therapy room slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving us in pitch black. The recorder continued to capture the sounds, the laughter now interspersed with anguished cries and whispered pleas for help. Desperate to find a way out, I felt my way along the wall, my fingers brushing against the cold, rough surface. Suddenly, a figure materialized before me, a translucent apparition of a woman in a tattered hospital gown, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Why are you here?" she whispered, her voice echoing with centuries of pain. I stammered, unable to form a coherent response. We mean no harm. We're just trying to understand." The apparition reached out, her hand passing through me as if I were made of smoke. "Remember our suffering," she pleaded. "Don't let us be forgotten." With that, she vanished, leaving me shaken to my core. Jiho grabbed my arm, pulling me back to reality. "We need to get out of here. Now." We fumbled in the darkness, trying to find the door, but it seemed to shift and change, the layout of the hospital defying logic. Every turn we took led us deeper into the maze, the oppressive weight of the hospital's history pressing down on us. The recorder captured everything, the laughter, the cries, the footsteps, but no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't make sense of the sounds. It was as if the hospital itself was alive, feeding off our fear and confusion. Hours felt like days as we wandered the endless corridors, the boundaries between the past and present blurring. Just when hope seemed lost, a faint light appeared in the distance, beckoning us towards what we hoped was an exit. As we approached, the light grew brighter, revealing a set of double doors that looked remarkably like the entrance we had come through. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The doors suddenly slammed shut once more, trapping us outside but unable to enter. Frustration and fear mounted as we realized there was no way out. The laughter and whispers surrounded us, now all around, pressing in from every direction. The recorder captured the final moments of our ordeal, our voices mingling with the restless spirits that haunted Ganjiam. In a last-ditch effort, I tried to communicate with the apparitions. "We're sorry for what happened here. We want to help you find peace." The air grew still, and for a moment, the sounds ceased. A profound silence enveloped us, broken only by the distant tolling of a bell. Slowly, the oppressive atmosphere began to lift, and the shadows receded. The doors to the entrance finally swung open, allowing us to step out into the fading daylight. We didn't look back as we fled the hospital, the weight of what we had experienced pressing heavily on our minds. Ganjiam Psychiatric Hospital stood silent once more, its secrets hidden behind decaying walls and the echoes of its tormented past. Back in Seoul, as I reviewed the footage and listened to the recordings, the reality of our encounter became undeniable. The laughter, the whispers, the apparitions, they were all captured. Proof that Ganjiam was more than just an abandoned building. It was a repository of lost souls, their stories etched into the very fabric of the hospital. Writing about Ganjiam felt different now. It wasn't just another article. It was a tribute to those who suffered and perished within its walls. The experience left an indelible mark on me, a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead, and the importance of remembering the past to honor those who can no longer speak for themselves. If you ever find yourself near Ganjiam Psychiatric Hospital, tread carefully. The shadows here are not just remnants of a bygone era. They are echoes of lives lost, yearning to be heard, and a testament to the darkness that can dwell within even the most solemn institutions. And who knows, you might just hear their whispers in the silence, reaching out from the depths of history to share their untold stories. Story number 4. Whispers in the Shadows, Haunting Memories of Old Changi Hospital. I've always been fascinated by places where history's dark chapters linger in the shadows, where the walls seem to whisper secrets of the past. Old Changi Hospital in Singapore is one such place, a sprawling, abandoned edifice with a history steeped in war, suffering, and unresolved pain. When I first heard about the hospital's haunted reputation, I dismissed it as mere folklore, but curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to explore the abandoned halls. Armed with nothing but my camera, a notebook, and a thirst for the truth, the journey began on a humid September evening. The sun was setting, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape as I made my way to Changi. The hospital, once a beacon of hope and healing, now stood silent and decaying, its structure a testament to time's relentless march. Built by the Japanese during World War II as a military hospital, it later served the civilian population before being abruptly abandoned in 1997. The stories that surrounded it were chilling. Tales of tortured Japanese soldier spirits and patients who met untimely, unjust deaths still roaming its deserted corridors. As I approached the main entrance, the air grew thick with an unsettling stillness. The gates, rusted and overgrown with ivy, creaked ominously as I pushed them open. The lobby, once bustling with activity, was now a haunting relic of the past. Dust-covered furniture, shattered glass, and remnants of medical equipment lay scattered, frozen in time. The oppressive silence was only broken by the distant sound of dripping water and the occasional scuttle of unseen creatures in the darkness. I switched on my flashlight, the beam piercing through the gloom as I stepped into the main corridor. The walls, adorned with peeling paint and faded signs in Japanese and English, seemed to close in around me. Each step echoed loudly, amplifying the sense of isolation. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and unease as I ventured deeper into the building, determined to uncover the truth behind the ghostly legends. "Why are you here?" a voice suddenly whispered, so faint I almost dismissed it as my imagination. I froze, scanning the hallway for any sign of movement. The corridor stretched endlessly, the oppressive atmosphere weighing heavily on my shoulders. I shook off the feeling, attributing it to the eerie setting, and continued forward. As I navigated the labyrinthine layout, I came across the remnants of what was once a bustling ward. Rusted beds stood in rows, their restraints broken and tangled. Medical charts, yellowed with age, were scattered across the floor, detailing treatments and patient information long forgotten. I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow for the lives that had been intertwined within these walls. Venturing into the surgical wing, the air grew colder, and a sense of dread settled over me. The large operating theaters, now dark and silent, bore witness to countless procedures, some perhaps performed under less than sterile conditions given the wartime setting. As I explored, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The shadows seemed to dance just beyond the reach of my flashlight, and every creak and groan of the building heightened my anxiety. In the heart of the hospital, I found what locals referred to as the torture room. The door, once a barrier against pain and suffering, now stood ajar, revealing a chamber of horrors. Bloodstains, still vivid against the decaying walls, told tales of unimaginable torment. My stomach churned at the sight, and I struggled to maintain my composure. It was here that the spirits of tortured Japanese soldiers were said to linger, their anguish echoing through eternity. I set up my camera, hoping to capture any anomalies, and began documenting the room. As I did, the temperature plummeted, my breath visible in the frigid air. A chill ran down my spine as I heard the distant sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and unsteady, my flashlight flickered, casting unsettling shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. "Please, help us," the voice whispered again, more insistent this time. I spun around, but the room remained empty. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize the experience. Perhaps it was the building settling, or maybe an animal had wandered in. But deep down, I knew something more sinister was at play. Determined to press on, I moved towards the administration office, where records and archives were once meticulously kept. The room was a treasure trove of history, filled with filing cabinets and old documents. As I sifted through the papers, I stumbled upon a diary belonging to a nurse who had worked at the hospital during the war. Her entries detailed the horrors she witnessed: patients subjected to cruel experiments, soldiers pushed beyond their limits, and the constant fear of retaliation from the Japanese authorities. As I read her words, a profound sense of empathy washed over me. These were real people, each with their own stories of pain and survival. The weight of their suffering seemed to permeate the very air, making the atmosphere even more oppressive. I closed the diary, feeling a connection to the past that was both comforting and heartbreaking. Exiting the office, I made my way to what was once the staff lounge. The room was cluttered with broken chairs and overturned tables, but something caught my eye: a mirror, cracked and smudged, leaned against the wall. I approached it cautiously, my reflection distorted by the fractured glass. As I gazed into the mirror, I felt a sudden, inexplicable pull, as if the spirits were trying to communicate through the glass. "Don't forget us," the voice echoed, now reverberating through the room. I recoiled, my mind racing to comprehend the message. It was clear that the spirits of both the Japanese soldiers and the unjustly dead patients were desperate to be remembered, their stories etched into the very fabric of Old Changi Hospital. Determined to honor their memories, I decided to spend the night within the hospital, documenting my experiences and attempting to bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Setting up my equipment in a secure room, I prepared for what was to come, knowing that the night would be long and fraught with uncertainty. As darkness enveloped the building, the hospital seemed to come alive with unseen energy. The temperature fluctuated wildly, and the sounds of the past echoed through the halls: voices, footsteps, and distant screams blending into a cacophony of anguish. I sat in silence, recording every sound, every whisper, hoping to capture the essence of the spirits that haunted these grounds. Hours passed, and the intensity of the supernatural activity only grew. Shadows danced across the walls, and fleeting apparitions materialized before my eyes, ghostly figures clad in tattered uniforms, their eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. I felt their presence, an overwhelming sense of sadness and longing that weighed heavily on my soul. In the early hours of the morning, I experienced the most profound encounter. A spectral figure approached me, its form flickering like a candle's flame. It was a Japanese soldier, his face contorted in pain, his uniform stained with blood. He reached out a ghostly hand, his voice a mere whisper. "Remember us," he implored. "Our suffering must not be forgotten." Tears welled in my eyes as I nodded, understanding the depth of his plea. "I will remember your stories, I promise." As the first light of dawn broke through the windows, the spirits began to fade, their presence gently receding as if finally finding peace. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a serene calm. Exhausted but fulfilled, I packed up my equipment, knowing that my experience at Old Changi Hospital would forever change me. Driving away from the abandoned hospital, I couldn't help but reflect on the profound connection I had felt with the spirits that lingered within those walls. Their stories of pain, resilience, and unfulfilled lives were now etched into my memory, compelling me to share their truths with the world. Back home, I compiled my findings into a detailed account, ensuring that the voices of those who had suffered at Old Changi Hospital would not be silenced by time. The experience had taught me the importance of remembering and honoring the past, no matter how dark or painful it may be. If you ever find yourself near Old Changi Hospital, tread carefully and with respect. The shadows here are not just remnants of a bygone era. They are echoes of lives lost and tormented souls yearning to be heard. Listen closely, and you might just hear their whispers, reaching out from the depths of history to share their untold stories. Story number 5. Whispers on Pine Hill, Haunting Secrets of Dalat Hospital. I've always been drawn to places where the veil between the past and present is thin, where history's echoes linger in the shadows. Dalat Hospital in Vietnam is one such place, a sprawling, abandoned psychiatric facility perched atop Pine Hill. Its once grand facade now crumbles under the weight of time, overgrown with ivy and shrouded in an unsettling silence. When I first heard about the hospital's haunted reputation, I dismissed it as mere folklore. But curiosity, fueled by countless ghost stories and my own fascination with the supernatural, led me to embark on a journey that would forever alter my perception of reality. It was late October when I arrived in Dalat, the air crisp with the onset of winter. The city, known for its serene lakes and temperate climate, seemed worlds away from the dark history that awaited me. My friend Lynn, a local historian, had insisted that I visit the hospital to uncover the truth behind the legends. She spoke of a woman in white, a ghostly apparition seen standing on Pine Hill at night, her eyes fixed on passers-by. Others had reported hearing cries and pleas for help emanating from the empty rooms within the decaying structure. We rented a jeep and drove through winding roads flanked by dense pine forests, the landscape growing more desolate as we approached the hospital. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. As we neared Pine Hill, the hospital's silhouette emerged against the fading light, its towering presence both majestic and foreboding. Built in the early 20th century, it had served as a sanctuary for those battling mental illness. But after its abrupt closure in 1997, it was left to decay, becoming a magnet for urban explorers and ghost hunters. "Are you ready for this?" Lynn asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we parked the jeep near the main entrance. I nodded, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Absolutely. Let's uncover the secrets of Pine Hill." The main doors, once grand and welcoming, now hung off their hinges, creaking ominously as we pushed them open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of mildew. The grand lobby, with its high ceilings and ornate decorations, was a ghostly reminder of the hospital's former glory. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and remnants of medical equipment lay scattered across the floor. Frozen in time, Lynn led the way, her flashlight cutting through the darkness as we ventured deeper into the building. The corridors were narrow and labyrinthine, the walls adorned with peeling paint and faded murals depicting scenes of hope and healing. Every step echoed loudly, amplifying the sense of isolation. My camera and notebook were in hand, ready to document whatever we might encounter. "We should start with the main ward," Lynn suggested, her voice steady despite the eerie surroundings. "That's where most of the activity is supposed to have happened." As we entered the large, open space of the main ward, the atmosphere grew heavier. The ceiling, once bright and airy, was now cracked and covered in grime, allowing only slivers of light to penetrate the gloom. Rows of rusted beds stood abandoned, their restraints broken and tangled. Personal belongings, old journals, worn-out shoes, and faded photographs were strewn across the floor, telling silent stories of the lives that once thrived here. "We've got to set up some equipment here," Lynn said, placing motion sensors and audio recorders at strategic points. "If there are any anomalies, we'll capture them." I nodded, activating the recorder. The silence that followed was almost deafening, broken only by the distant drip of water and the occasional scuttle of unseen creatures in the darkness. Minutes passed without incident, the oppressive stillness making my skin crawl. "Let's check out the old therapy rooms," Lynn suggested, leading me down a long corridor lined with closed doors. "That's where most of the reports come from." We approached one of the therapy rooms, the door hanging ajar. Inside, the room was a mess: broken chairs, overturned tables, and remnants of past treatments lay scattered about. As I examined the area, a sudden chill swept through the room, making me shiver involuntarily. "Did you feel that?" I asked, glancing at Lynn. She nodded, her eyes scanning the room. "Yeah, there's definitely something here." Just then, a loud thud echoed from the far end of the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching. My heart raced as I turned towards the source, but the corridor remained empty. The temperature dropped further, my breath visible in the frigid air. Maybe it's just the building settling, Lynn suggested, though her voice lacked conviction. Before I could respond, a soft, haunting melody began to play, a lullaby that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The sound was sweet yet sorrowful, filling the room with an eerie ambience. I followed the sound, drawn towards a staircase leading to the upper floors. As we ascended, the melody grew louder, more distinct. The air felt thick with sorrow, as if the very essence of the place was crying out for help. Reaching the top of the stairs, we found ourselves in a long, dimly lit corridor. At the end stood a figure, a woman in a flowing white dress, her back to us, staring intently down the hallway. "Lynn, do you see that?" I whispered, my voice trembling. She nodded slowly, her eyes wide with fear and fascination. The woman remained still, her presence both captivating and terrifying. I felt an inexplicable urge to approach her, to understand the pain that lingered in her spectral form. As I took a step forward, the woman turned, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through my very soul. Her expression was one of profound sadness, her mouth slightly open as if attempting to communicate a silent plea. I reached out a hand, but it passed through her as if she were made of mist. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The woman raised her hand, pointing towards the end of the corridor. My gaze followed her gesture, and I saw the faint outline of another figure, this one a man, his face twisted in anguish. The air around us grew colder, and the melody of the lullaby intensified, now accompanied by soft, distant cries. "We're trapped," Lynn said softly, her voice echoing the sentiment. "We can't leave until our stories are told." Suddenly, the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, the walls closing in around us. The temperature plummeted, and the oppressive atmosphere became almost unbearable. The woman in white began to fade, her form dissolving into the shadows as the cries grew louder, more desperate. "We need to leave," I insisted, pulling Lynn back towards the stairs. But the exit seemed miles away, the hospital's layout morphing into an endless maze. Panic set in as the sounds of suffering surrounded us, the weight of countless untold stories pressing down on my chest. The recorder captured every sound, the lullaby, the cries, the anguished whispers, but no matter how hard we tried, we couldn't make sense of it. In the midst of our desperation, a sudden gust of wind blew through the corridor, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. The room was alive with the echoes of the past, the spirits of those who had suffered and perished within these walls reaching out to us. "Lynn, stay close," I whispered, feeling her grip tighten around my arm. We fumbled in the darkness, trying to find our way back, but the hospital seemed to reject our presence. Every door led us deeper into the labyrinth, every turn taking us further from the exit. The cries turned into pleas, the whispers into urgent demands. "Remember us," the voices echoed, a chorus of sorrow and despair. "Don't let us be forgotten." Just when hope seemed lost, a faint light appeared in the distance, a beacon guiding us towards what we hoped was an exit. With renewed determination, we moved towards the light, the oppressive atmosphere lifting slightly as we drew closer. As we approached, the light grew brighter, revealing the main entrance we had come through. Relief washed over us, but it was short-lived. The doors swung open wide, as if welcoming us back, and we rushed through, stumbling into the cool night air. We didn't stop running until we reached the safety of our jeep, our hearts pounding and minds reeling from the experience. The hospital loomed behind us, its silhouette bathed in the light of the moon, a silent sentinel guarding its haunted secrets. Back in Dalat, Lynn and I reviewed the footage and recordings. The evidence undeniable. The lullaby, the cries, the apparitions, all captured on camera. The experience had left an indelible mark on us, a haunting reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. Writing about Dalat Hospital felt different now. It wasn't just another story. It was a tribute to those who had suffered within its walls, their voices finally heard. The whispers on Pine Hill were no longer mere legends, but echoes of lives lost and tormented souls yearning for peace. If you ever find yourself near Dalat Hospital, tread carefully and with respect. The shadows here are not just remnants of a bygone era. They are echoes of pain, resilience, and the enduring power of memory. Listen closely, and you might just hear their whispers, reaching out from the depths of history to share their untold stories.